about his brain. The podcast where I, Sean, embark on a journey to understand what's happening in my own head. Spoiler alert, I have no clue, but that's precisely why we're here. In each episode, I explore questions about the brain that I believe will resonate with all of us. Like, why can't I turn my brain off at 3 a.m.? Why my memory only works when it feels like it? And why my brain seems to betray me when I need it most. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm no expert. I'm just a guy looking to unravel the mysteries of my own mind. Fortunately, I happen to know a cognitive neuroscientist who is an expert in the brain, and I get to ask him all the questions I want. So, if you're curious, confused, or simply along for the ride, welcome. And hey, if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, or whatever it is you do wherever you listen to podcasts. I don't know how the algorithms work. I just know that your support keeps this journey moving forward. And together, we might just discover something remarkable. This is Jon Teaches Sean about his brain. Let's get started. Hi, Jon. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Sean. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And like I said, I mean welcome, because when I first, we'll start with a little bit of honesty. I hate to put you on the spot, but when I first kind of brought up the idea of doing a podcast, I guess you could say you were reluctant.
Yeah, that's probably a really good term for a podcast.
Well, I know that everyone is doing a podcast these days, but what was it that you didn't feel comfortable with or want to do?
Yeah, a lot of people are doing podcasts. A lot of people are probably doing a better job than I would do at talking about the brain, I'm sure. So I was just thinking, why would anybody listen to me talk about the brain? So I enjoy listening to people talk about the brain and talk and have podcasts on that. I listen to podcasts about it. So I was just thinking, yeah, I'm not the person for that. I am not, the person that's out on the stage all the time wanting to really raw things. So I love discussions and I love talking about things and I love listening. Small groups are great. I was a professor, so I love teaching, but yeah, I just was thinking the podcast probably is not going to work for me, just in all honesty. So reluctant is good. I'm glad you didn't say kicking and screaming, because that would have been probably also close to accurate. Well, why did you want to do a podcast? Maybe I'll turn it back on you and put you on the spot.
No, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think that you know most of this, but I went to a public school, public all the way up through high school. And I think you would call it the inner city. The school I went to was not great. And I wasn't a good student either. There was a bad combination there of inner city public school and not a good student. I wasn't interested in learning, didn't really care at that point in my life what teachers had to say. I played basketball. I'm tall. I wasn't very athletic. I'm tall, but and so I had to maintain a 2.0 grade point average. That was my focus because I wanted to play basketball. And so when I graduated high school, I didn't have the grade point average to go to a university. So I went to community college. And then at community college, played basketball. Again, my focus, not learning. And community college, I try not to be too negative about these things, but they just wanted me to play basketball. So a lot of the classes that I took were to keep me involved in the basketball program. So I did graduate from community college with an AA degree. And then once you have that, your grade point average doesn't matter anymore. So I got into a small college, again, to play basketball. So you see, my focus was like not on learning, is my point, is I just wanted to play basketball, and I did what I had to maintain that grade point average. When my eligibility was up, I had not graduated yet. I dropped out of college. I dropped out of college with 26 credits left to graduate. Still haven't done it. So I'm 26 credits away from a bachelor's degree.
So I don't think you're that much different than me in that sense. So I played basketball at a small school, and I'm tall like you, but even less athletic. So but it was still about basketball, and I did what I had to do to play basketball. And then I did work on my grades because I did want to do a little bit more. And then I went to graduate school, obviously. But I think that uh, you know, I just knowing you as long as I've known you, which has been several years, and talking to you, I'll send you like research articles to read, the research articles that I read, and you'll read and we'll discuss them. And it's not that you couldn't have done what I did as far as mentally. It's that you just chose a different path. And we'll talk about our paths, I'm sure. I think you said that's what we were going to talk about today. But I think for a lot of people, the brain and brain science and talking about how the brain works or trying to understand it is intimidating because there's a lot of big words associated with it, and there is a lot of knowledge that you have to learn certain things to understand it, to be able to talk about it. But it's just like anything. My wife's a teacher, a public school teacher. My daughter's a public school high school English teacher. My wife taught elementary school. But when I listen to teacher friends talk and all, I get lost because they have so many acronyms and so many ways to say things. It's like they have their own language in a sense, and I'm not in that mode, so it I don't understand everything they're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Just like people who are listening to neuroscientists talk, it sounds like they're talking a different language a lot of time because they've learned the language and now they can discuss it. But it's not that there's like, I don't consider myself smarter than you. It's just I chose a different path than you chose. And I think the listeners, it'd be good for them to know that we're going to talk about the brain in a way that anybody, no matter what your educational background is, you can understand it and learn it. And I don't want it to be intimidating to people. So I want people to be able to listen and to understand and then be able to think about the brain differently than they've thought about it before. Because it's really almost like if you learn like how to change the oil on your lawnmower or something like that, it can sound daunting until you do it and you go, oh, this is just kind of these mechanics that work this way. The brain obviously is much more complex than a a motor, but that's the idea, that as you start kind of immersing yourself in that conversation, that language, it gets easier and easier to understand.
Yeah, I didn't really get like you said. I appreciate you saying two things. Number one, you kind of glossed over the fact that the name of this podcast is John Teaches Sean About His Brain,
Yeah.
and the reason for that is and you just said it in a very nice way, that you are going to teach me in a way that I can understand it. But you said it in a much nicer way. And the other kind of piece of this is that um, the articles you send and all that to me now, and it's probably that's what I'm maybe getting to, is I read them, I try to digest them, I'm interested now. But it's regret, right? You look back and all the years wasted not caring to know more. For me, not interested in any of this stuff. And now within the last few years, I actually want to know all this information, and it's me kicking myself, going, you could have learned geography. You and I, or no, that wasn't you and I. I have another friend from Kansas, and she flew here for Christmas, and she was saying that she drove to Denver to fly here, and my brain went, that doesn't make sense. What are you talking about? And the problem is, I don't know geography. I don't know that Colorado's that close to Kansas, as an example, right? So I'm just angry at myself for wasted time not paying attention in class. But
Yeah, I get
go,
that. I get that.
going going back, I drop out of college, going on the same path of, this is how I end up where I'm at, is drop out of college and join the Marine Corps. In the wrong order, by the way. Most people join the Marine Corps, and then when they get out, the government pays for your college. I didn't do that. So 4 years in the Marine Corps, and I enjoyed the Marine Corps. I had a good time in the Marine Corps, but then left and became a police officer, and I did that up, and I was in law enforcement to one degree or another until recently, and that's where we met. But I still, look back and go, I'm smart enough to adapt and get by. Like, you have to be somewhat intelligent, or maybe not the right word, but you got to be pretty sharp to be a cop. A lot of information, a lot of stuff happens. But I still look back and go, I wish that I would have done it differently from an educational standpoint, right? But and was you said, let me go back to you just a little bit. You are a doctor, correct?
Yes, a PhD. Yes,
Right. Not a medical doctor.
not
I
an
wasn't going
MD,
to
but a
ask you about the
PhD.
bump on my neck. I just mean, no. So what do you have your doctorate in?
So it's in psychology, and there's different fields in psychology. The research side of psychology is sometimes referred to as experimental psychology. So I went to the University of Nevada in Reno, and the experimental psychology program had their program was named Cognitive and Brain Sciences. So I got my
Oh,
PhD in that program in cognitive and brain sciences out of the University of Nevada.
okay. And okay, so that's your PhD. Did you also get your undergrad degree there at
No,
Nevada?
I got my PhD, my master's degree there at the University of Nevada, and I received an undergraduate degree, Bachelor of Arts from Mid-American Nazarene University in Olathe, Kansas.
In Kansas. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
you're from Kansas. Like
from
where'd you grow
Kansas.
up as a child? Where?
Okay, so I was born in Fort Scott. That's a small town that's about 80 miles south of Kansas City, just straight down the line from Kansas City. If you're not that good on geography,
Thank
Kansas
you for that.
City splits. It bleeds over into two states, Kansas and Missouri. So the state line of Kansas and Missouri runs through Kansas City. And by the way, I say Missouri because my mom was from Missouri, my dad was from Kansas, and my mom taught me how to say it correctly, which is not Missouri, it's Missouri.
Oh, wait.
And
So, but your mom is from one side of in a different
yeah,
state.
a
Dad's
little
from
town called Blackjack, Missouri.
yeah, but
And
these are
my
star-crossed lovers, right? Like those two states don't always like
No,
like each
there's
other.
something called border wars here. I grew up in
Yeah.
Fort Scott, and it's where a fort is. And the fort was built. Oh man, I should know this. I didn't realize I was going to be doing history
Sorry,
here.
I put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's okay. It was built in the 1800s, and the cavalry, our military, was trying to move west, and they went too far west to build this fort because their supply lines kept getting cut off. So they abandoned the fort for a few years until they could move forward, and then retook it over in the 1800s something. And so that's kind of the first like fort and establishment in Kansas. And so the fort, they had cannons and things like that. Well, during the Civil War, right before the Civil War, in fact, the first battle, I think, of the Civil War was fought in Lecompton, Kansas, about 15 miles from where I'm at right now. But
Oh,
it
wow.
started, the battle started because Kansas was going to vote whether to be a free state or a slave state. And people from Missouri started coming over to stuff the ballot boxes to make it a slave state. And Kansas wanted to be a free state. And so the first vote was for it to be a slave state, but Kansas said that wasn't us, and they went all the way to Congress to get a revote. And again, I'm butchering history. I'm remembering I didn't pay
No,
attention as much as I
we're
should have,
laying
like you
we're
said.
listen, we're laying the groundwork for the
So
rivalry between these two
yeah.
states.
So
It's
people can look this up and get the actual
yeah.
facts. These are the Kansas facts of this. So they had another vote, and we voted to be a free state. But during this time, it's like John Brown and all that. Some of the first battles were over these voting rights between a free and a slave state because all of this was boiling up around the nation, and the people from Missouri, it was called bushwhacked. They would just kill people from Kansas as they're going places. Kansas would fight back. John Brown would go just try to kill people from on the other side. It was known as Bloody Kansas during that time, and there was a lot of bloodshed at that time for Kansas to become a free state. And so there was uh, hatred is a mild word between the two states, and we're several generations removed from that, but there's still, you've heard of epigenetics where your experiences kind of get passed along in
Mhm.
your genes, and so you can
Yes.
kind of hold that Hatfield McCoy rivalry for a while. So there's still a rival. It's not bloody Kansas anymore. There's not killings and deaths and things like at the beginning of the Civil War, but there is kind of a dislike between the two states, I would say, to some degree. I like people from, my mom was from Blackjack, Missouri.
Right,
So
right.
yeah,
That's
so I'm riding the fence. And my
okay.
dad was from Bronson, Kansas, and they, against all odds, maybe, no. So I don't want to overdo the rivalry, but if you listen to like sports radio or talk radio here in the Kansas City area, you'll hear it almost every day. The two sides going at each other, and
Because
then
it's coming out in sports right now, right? Like
yeah,
where a certain sports team is going to be in Kansas City, Missouri, or are they going to be in Kansas? It's funny because
yeah.
I don't know if you listen to the podcast Smartless, but Smartless is great. But there was a running, I don't know if it's still going, but a running kind of not even a joke, but they couldn't figure out where the Kansas City Royals played. Was it in Kansas? Was it in Missouri? And it went on and on. And I thought it was hilarious, but I wish they could have talked to you. You maybe could have explained it. But so what?
Both sports teams are now, the Royals and the Chiefs. Their leases are up. They're both playing in Kansas City, Missouri.
They're in Missouri.
In
Okay.
Missouri,
I
yeah.
hope Jason Bateman someday listens to this podcast because this will help him.
But they're looking to move. They're considering, I should say, both teams are considering moving because their leases are up in like 2029 or something like that. So if they're going to build stadiums, they have to right away. So yeah, it's a hot topic right now in the Kansas City area.
Because they might move to Kansas, right? To the other
They might
state.
move to Kansas. They might move to a different location in Kansas City, Missouri, or they might. And the Royals have said they are moving no matter what. They're building a new stadium. It's just which side of the state line they build it on, in Kansas or Missouri. The Chiefs are considering another renovation. They just renovated recently. They're considering another renovation or to move and build a new stadium.
Okay. So what? Let me go back to then your parents. What did they do when you were growing up? What did your dad do? What did your mom do?
My dad was a minister, so he at a church. He was principal of a private school.
Okay.
He became superintendent of that school. While he was with that school, this was in Fort Scott again, a small town of about 7,000 people. He worked with the state and with that school to build 68 Section 8 housing units for people in need and managed that while he was there. He also got his PhD from Kansas State University in higher ed administration, and then he became president of a small college as well in Kansas City. My mom started out, she taught at the Conservatory of Music in Kansas City. She was an excellent pianist. She then was a housewife really after that, I have two older sisters, and then there was a 10-year gap, and then I have another sister and me. So it was kind of almost like two families. So I tell everybody I had four moms with three older sisters and a mom. I had four moms, really.
Yep.
Which explains a lot, right? Why I'm so spoiled, probably.
Oh, I did not say that.
And then when I was born in Fort Scott on a small, we had like 60 acres and cattle and horses and things like that. My granddad and uncle had another 1,200 and some acres. And so I grew up, riding horses, riding motorcycles, hunting, all kinds of those things. And then when I was 12, my world got shattered because that's when my dad took the job at a small college in Kansas City, and I had to leave I had to sell the motorcycle, sell the horses, all of that stuff, and move to the city into a house, and it was devastating. But that's when I was 12, and so I grew up in the Overland Park, Kansas area. So it's a suburb of Kansas City.
Okay. So kind of, I don't know, I would say you grew up on a farm, but it sounds like a farm until you were 12. And so I'm trying to put together how we got from there to PhD in psychology. So when did you decide you wanted to be a psychologist? Was it just, talk about that a little bit.
I can remember specifically when I decided I wanted to be a psychologist, which that's probably about the only thing I can remember specifically.
Okay.
But I was in high school, and I had to write a research paper. I think it was for English. I had to write a research paper, and it was, you could pick your own topic. And I was like, I don't know what to write. And I was talking to my dad about it. And he was like reading the evening paper and sitting there kind of listening and reading. And we were talking. And I said, I don't know what to write it on. And he said, write it on syphilis. I'm like, what? I didn't
Uh,
know what syphilis was. And he said, there's
Thankfully,
some,
yeah,
yeah.
okay.
He said, there are some really interesting behavioral disorders that can come about from syphilis that psychologists study. And I was like, who studies? He said, there's, psychology is a field of study that's really interesting because it's about the human mind. I'm like, what do you mean about the human mind? He told me just a little bit about it. And he said, he said, I've got a textbook you can look at and read. And I started reading that stupid textbook that was way outdated by then. But just, it was like, oh man, just the different concepts they brought up and all really excited me. So I was like,
That's
this is what
great.
I want to do. I want to study this. And I was wanting to be, so I thought I'm going to be a psychologist. And I was thinking, like most people, when you say psychologist, you think clinical psychologist. Like I'm going to
Mhm.
sit and
Cardigan
talk to
pipe,
people.
sit on and they lay on a
Exactly.
couch. That's
Patches
the
on my elbow, laid
yes, yeah,
back, and we'll talk. Yeah.
okay.
And stroke my beard a little bit
Mhm.
and sound really smart, which is what I wanted to
Take
do
notes on a
most.
yellow kinda the yellow pad, right?
Exactly. And
Okay.
when people say stuff, go,
Hmm. What do you
mm.
think about that? How does that make you feel?
Exactly. So that's what I wanted to do originally. But I also had this, my grandfather on my mom's side, my grandpa was from Germany or German heritage, and he invented printing presses and things like that. And so he had a printing press company, and he was always tinkering with things like in Blackjack, where my mom was from. They had the first kind of refrigerator because he dug a hole and built a pulley for his wife to lower groceries down like butter and milk down underground to keep it cool, and then she would just pull it back. He had a little switch actually that would bring it up to keep it cool, and he was always trying to invent things like that. And I wish I would have gotten his smarts, which I didn't, but I got enough curiosity from him that I was always trying to figure out how things worked. So my childhood went like this. I would get a radio and find a screwdriver and unscrew the back of it and look at it and look at all the wires. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I would mess around with it, and then I would try to put it back, and I couldn't get it back together right. And then I'd messed up some wires so it wouldn't work after that. And then I took my bicycle like tires off, and I was working on it and found the ball bearings. I had no idea what they were, and I opened it up, and it was so amazing. There's these little metal balls with grease all over them, and I was trying, and then I couldn't get my bike put back together. My dad was always like, what are you doing? So I was always wanting to see how things worked. And in psychology, you're talking to people a lot of times about issues and problems, but you're not being able to see how they work. And so that's why I kind of shifted my focus into experimental psychology to try to figure out how the brain works in from like maybe from a research standing or more objective viewpoint, I guess.
And so the term cognitive psychology or cognitive neuroscientist, sorry, different than a psychologist, right? Or is that a
Yeah,
branch of psychology?
it is. So terms can get they're used differently at different times, so it's hard to kind of nail down the term. But there's in psychology, there's cognitive psychologists, and so they're studying things like attention, memory, and those types of things of how the brain works. Um, but it's more with questions and answers and surveys, and there's experiments. I mean, it's experimental, but
Mhm.
it's the idea that I'm going to give you some information, and I'm going to see how you respond to it. And I'm going to look at and then I'm going to do that to a lot of people and see if I can find patterns. And I know what I'm sending in, and I know what's coming out. And then I've got to infer several things from that. And then neuroscience is looking more at the kind of the hardwiring of the brain. This is how the brain works. So cognitive psychology maybe is more about the mind, and then neuroscience is a little bit more about the brain and how the brain's wired. So now you're studying brain cells like neurons, and then you're looking at groupings of cells, and then you're using tools to study things like you're using the MRI machines, or EEG, the electroencephalogram, and those types of tools to see how the brain works. But then you're seeing how it works on cognitive related issues, like with attention and with memory. So it's, neuroscience can be down at the cellular level, or it can be at the systems level. Like, how does the whole system work? How does the memory system work? But we're still measuring the brain and what it's doing, but it's at a systems level. So that's the cognitive neuroscience. The cognitive side is kind of the psychology side of how the mind works, but then you're using neuroscience techniques to study that.
Okay. So you change paths from the cardigan and pipe to you want to do research. Just to put it plainly.
Yes.
So you get your you get your undergrad degree, master's, you get your PhD. What happens after that? You graduate from the University of Nevada, Reno.
Yeah, and
What's
then you
next?
got to look for a job.
Okay.
So I got my first job in academia was at Minnesota State University in Mankato, Minnesota,
Okay.
with the psychology department there. And then it's really at that point, what do you want to do for research? Because part of your job that department will hire you for is to teach students about psychology and neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is for you to help students progress through the system. So you're an advisor to a certain number of students. You get signed a certain number of students for that. So you have kind of a service to the university, and you're on committees and things like that. And then part of it is your contribution back to your field through research and publications and those types of efforts. So
So
you're hired
you're
to
in the
do kind of
classroom.
three things.
Yeah, three things. You're teaching the students,
Yep.
you're advising the students, but you're also doing research at the same time. You're
Yes.
doing all three of those at
Yeah.
Minnesota State
And
Mankato.
different universities kind of have different ways to split up those percentages between the three. And so
Okay.
there are universities called Research One universities that rely heavily on federal grants for research. And they might have you teach 2 classes a semester so you can do research. And then some that are not Research One, like where I started at Minnesota State, they might have you teach 4 classes and still do research. So there's a higher percentage there's a higher amount of time spent teaching than researching. And in some
Mm.
universities, they want you to do more researching rather than teaching, if
Oh,
that makes sense.
so
So
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no,
Sorry.
no, no. What were you saying?
No, I'm probably going to stomp on what you were going to say. I just, you said, I don't remember the exact words, but in saying that was the first college, or did you go somewhere after that?
Yes. Yeah. So then after Minnesota State, it's really cold in Minnesota. I don't know if you
You,
know that or not.
I was born in Minnesota.
Okay.
I'm
So
from,
know.
I try not to say I'm from Minnesota, but I mean everyone in my family, and I mean everyone is from and actually, not to one up you, but they're from International Falls, Minnesota,
Oh, that's the
which
place that
is
always sets the records every year.
it's the ice box of the nation. It's the cold. Yeah, my people found the coldest place you could live and just set up camp there for generations. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
awesome.
it's even colder than Alaska, right?
Yeah,
Most of the time.
yeah, most of the
Yeah, it's
time.
the coldest place in
So
America.
anyway, yes,
Wow.
it is cold in Minnesota. So
Okay,
what
so
was next?
you were born there. So you're saying you weren't raised there, meaning your family moved when you were little.
Yeah, I was born in St. Cloud, and then
Hmm.
lived, in Minnesota for 2 years. Like, I don't
Okay.
remember.
Okay.
We left there when I was, yeah, I think 2, to move to Washington State.
Okay. Well, I moved there. Well, my family moved there. I moved my family there, and it was they were in third, fourth, and sixth grades, I believe. My 3 kids. So my wife and I moved there. I've never been so cold in all my life. That first winter, and I remember we were moving from Nevada, and my kids loved Reno. They had all their friends, just like you. Anywhere your kids are
Yeah,
growing
yeah.
up, they love the area. So we moved to Reno when they were really little for me to go to school, which is another story we don't have to talk about, because I started graduate school later than most people. But I remember walking. We were at the mall, and it was I think it was still like November, December. We hadn't even really hit winter yet, but it was so cold. And I remember as we were walking, my middle child, Jonas, said, "Dad, why do we move to Minnesota?" And this is just, we've only been there for a few months now.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Because I had to have a job." And he said, "Why didn't you just teach at Nevada while you were there?" And I said, and this is, I'm saying all this, but my lips aren't really moving. I'm kind of gritting
Right.
my teeth, trying to talk through the cold. And I said, "Because you, when you get your degree from someplace, they don't want to hire you at that place. You have to go teach somewhere else because they want to bring in new ideas. They don't want you to learn their ideas and then keep teaching it from those professors. They want you to go out somewhere else and they want to bring in new professors and new ideas. So you can't teach at the same place you get your degree from." And we walked a few more steps in silence, and he said, "You should have got your degree in Minnesota." And then we moved to Nevada. I was like, yeah,
From the mouth of babes.
that
There is a
might have been a better
strategy.
idea.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Minnesota was great. The university there was great. The department there, I still am in contact with my colleagues there. I loved it
Mhm.
there. I love the colleagues that I had there. I love the students there. It was largely first generation students, and I had a great time. And they were supportive and research and everything like that. However, Casey and I, my wife Casey and I, did not adapt to the cold as quickly as our kids did. Like our kids, after that first winter, it was nothing. They were out in the winter all the time. I never adjust. I don't know why I could not adjust to the cold. And it would be the psychology department was in the basement of Armstrong Hall. And so I would get to work at like 7:30 and it would be dark and I would park and walk across a cold, dark parking lot. When I left at about 5 to go back to my car, it was dark and
Dark.
cold as I walked out, and I was in the basement all day. There were no windows. I wouldn't see sunshine. It was just,
Hmm.
I should have got out and walked around more, I realized, but it was just, we had a hard time adjusting. And my wife is from North Carolina. So she's like, "Can we move back to the East Coast where it's a little bit warmer?" So I applied for and got a job at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And
Okay.
that's where I was for several years until I resigned that position to start the tech company that Preflex, that we'll talk about at
Yeah.
some point, I'm sure.
I want to get to that, but at Dickinson, then what you had brought up that every college has their own split. So what
Yeah.
was the split similar there or different?
No, it was a hybrid, and I should say that that it was almost half the amount of time in the classroom, which gave me a lot more time for research. So
Okay.
they split it closer, really similar to a Research One school, which is really unheard of in small colleges like that. They really put an emphasis on research and letting their professors kind of develop as a researcher and kind of establish themselves. So they were really good about that. Dickinson College was also really good about that, and I had a great department there, and everybody in the department, I loved working with everybody there as well. I had really two amazing experiences as a college professor where I hear horror stories from friends and colleagues in higher ed that sometimes you wind up in a place that's awful and there's infighting, there's bitterness and backstabbing, and it's crazy. Well, even some departments at Dickinson, there was some of that going on. So I was lucky in the places I landed,
Yeah.
extremely lucky.
But you're happy in the job you're at Dickinson or wherever. I mean, you're doing research, you're doing all the stuff you want to do, but you decide to leave
Mhm.
to start a tech company, and you don't have a background in tech that I've heard.
I do not.
Talk to
So
me about that decision. What made you leave academia to launch this company?
so let me talk a little bit about my research to explain
Yeah,
that.
please. That'd be great.
So one of my first real studies, and this is when I was still at Nevada, is I was looking at trying to decide how to explain this in a way that's quick and easy. But uh, I was interested, we're talking about cognitive things like attention, memory, and stuff like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Imagination is one of those things that's studied. So how do we imagine things? And then on the cognitive psychology and especially the neuroscience side, it's what is the brain? How does it handle imagination? Like what's it doing? How does it generate imaginations? And there's something called aphantasia, which is if you have aphantasia, it means you cannot generate mental images in your head. You can't create pictures in your head. And so it ranges from that to some people can generate extremely vivid images in their mind. And I'm closer to the aphantasia side of it. I
Oh,
don't have that, but it is extremely difficult for me to imagine something I've seen before. It's more like a memory that I know about it, but I can't see it, if that makes sense.
that does. But can I ask? Well, two things that come to mind is that let's say when you, since you said you're closer to
Hmm.
that side of the scale, when you are talking to someone on the telephone you've never seen before, do you picture them?
Yeah, I do,
Okay,
but it's
that is
not.
that different?
It's no. That's mental imagery. That's your
Yeah.
imagination,
Okay.
visualization. But
Yeah.
I picture them in, oh, this person's probably older, or this person probably is really thin and like
Hmm.
so I'll have but it's not, I don't see a picture of them. It's almost like I imagine a description.
Oh,
It's
descriptors.
hard to
Yeah.
explain.
Yeah.
So
A lot of people they actually picture the person. They have a
yeah.
picture of their face, their body, because then when they meet,
Hmm.
oftentimes they're like, "That's not how I pictured you."
Yeah.
That's
Or
what I was
listening to
thinking about.
podcasts.
Is
When you see
yeah,
them then on YouTube or something, you're going,
and
whoa, I
you're
didn't
like,
think they
"That
look
is
like that.
not how I pictured them." And then
Exactly.
let me just the second one then, which is I think the same thing, but I just want to make sure that I'm on track with this. Is that you're reading a book, and usually
Hmm.
it's a not it's a fiction. It's a story about
Right.
people, but they describe the people. Do you
Hmm.
picture the people
A
vividly
little
or
bit, not vividly. So I do a little
okay?
bit. So how about you?
I
Can you
picture
picture
the
things
people
vividly?
pretty vividly. Yeah, yeah.
Casey is like that. And in fact, when we were in college and dating, this came up and I had no idea there was any such thing as aphantasia. And I didn't know anything about mental imagery at that time. She was just saying things she remembered and like giving really detailed. And I was going, you can't, you can't remember that, can you? And she's going, yes. And I was going, that doesn't sound, because I couldn't.
Right.
And so I was thinking that does, because I thought everybody's brain worked exactly the same, and it doesn't. And so I didn't understand that, but she is very good. Like, can you, like, if you close your eyes right now and imagine a tiger, like a Bengal tiger,
Hmm.
can you see the stripes, the black and orange
Yes.
stripes? And can you count the stripes?
Yes.
See, I can't. I know there's stripes and I can kind of picture it, but I can't count them. I can't
Oh,
see them and count them.
I can see them.
So there's even a test out there, the VVIQ, which now I know the acronym. I didn't know I was going to be talking about this either, so I should have looked it up.
That's okay. There's a test out there.
Visual vividness something. So the
Okay.
VVIQ is one that kind of tells you how good you are at mental imagery. And when you
Okay.
give the test, like Casey scored really high and I scored really low. But I was saying, I was kind of introducing that to say there was a debate in science. It doesn't matter if you're not like right in the middle of the debate, but they were saying, where do these images come from? And the two sides were, one said it's language based, and one said, no, it's visual based, like when you're imagining a visual picture. And so some were saying, no, you just have, it's based on language, which I kind of agree with because that's how I see my images.
Hmm.
But Casey was like, no, just knowing her and her system is like, there has to be some visual stuff about this. So there was a debate going on, and this was back in the 1970s, 1980s. And then the MRI machine came out, and I don't know if people are familiar with an MRI. You usually get an MRI like if you've blown your knee or if you have a tumor or like a
Right.
brain scan or whatever, because it's this really large magnet that aligns all of your ions and things. Anyway, it gives you a picture. And so like for a brain scan, it will take a picture of your brain in kind of in detail and but then cognitive neuroscientists can use that tool. They can take a picture of the brain when you're resting to see where most of the blood flow is in your brain. And then they can have you do a cognitive task, like imagine a tiger and count its stripes, and then subtract those two from each other. And what you have left is an area that's lit up in the brain where it's active. So you can see what's active while you're imagining that. And so
Okay.
when they would do those tests, they would say, oh, the visual cortex at the back of your head is active, and other areas too, but the visual cortex is also active. So maybe it's using the visual cortex. And then the other side said, to do a cognitive scan, it's like 20 to 30 seconds. And the brain has this massive feedback system. So anytime it sends a signal in one direction, it's almost twice as many signals going back in the other direction as kind of feedback, double checking itself, making sure it's understanding the messages being sent. So
Hmm.
they were saying, no, even if it's language based, that's just the feedback going back is why the visual cortex is active. So it was this debate going on. And so I and my advisor at the time, Mike Crignali, we used the EEG, the electroencephalogram, to measure this because the fMRI shows you where things are happening, but doesn't give you any idea about the timing of it. But the EEG gives you timing information. So those are little sensors that you place at different places on the scalp, and they measure electrical activity like a millisecond at the time. So you get 1,000 voltage recordings every second. So you know exactly what
Jeez.
time something's happening.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then with that, we were able to show that the visual cortex, like when you see something, it
Hmm.
goes, your eyes in the back, the retinas capture those photons of light as it's bouncing off of an object. And then that information travels down your optic nerve and eventually goes to V1, which is the visual cortex in the very back of your head. That's the first area of that wrinkly part of your brain that gets input from the visual world. And that starts, it's like if it's a machinery, if it's a machine, that's the input of that information to that machine. And then that machine builds an image of the world out there in front of you. So you have visual machinery in your head. And so we were able to show that that visual machinery is used when you see something, and it's used in the same way when you imagine something.
Hmm.
And so that
Hmm.
was important, theoretically at the time, but then that got me thinking, wait a minute. If both your imagination and your memory, like visual memory and imagination and actual sight or seeing all use the same machine, what if you're doing all three at the same time? Which signal's the greatest? And obviously, what you're seeing is the strongest signal because I can imagine, like I'm looking at you right now in this podcast. We're in different places, but the camera's on you. I can see you, and then I could imagine you like opening your mouth really wide and screaming or something like that. But it's that signal, so I can kind of imagine that, even though I'm
Hmm.
not good at imagination. But I don't actually think that you just did that because I can see that you're not doing that. So
Right.
the visual signal is the strongest. So then I was thinking, is there a situation where maybe what you're imagining is a stronger signal than what you're seeing? And my first thought was, what about eyewitness testimonies? Because sometimes they'll remember things that are way different than what actually happened.
Yeah.
You're like, are
Yeah.
they lying about what's going on? And so that got me interested in kind of learning more about imagination in the brain and how that works and how those signals get different weights. And so when I went to Minnesota State, a professor there asked me a question, said I was talking to a person who was a police officer in another state, and they had this story. And I was wondering, since you're a cognitive neuroscientist, can you explain to me how this happened? This officer and their partner, two of them were chasing a person, and the person was known to be dangerous. They had come to a dead end or something and got out of their car and was running. So these two officers were running. And the officer telling the story was the third one, was furthest behind. And when the first one rounded the corner, ahead of the person they were chasing and the other officer rounded the corner. And when this third officer rounded, those other two were in a tussle. And one of them, the person they were chasing, grabbed the officer's gun and put it to his head and yelled at the other officer to stand back. And that officer saying, wait, don't do anything, let's talk. And then the person shot the officer's partner in the head, and he saw the head kind of explode on the other side, and his partner slumped to the ground, and that guy took off running, and he started chasing him. And he said he didn't remember much in the chasing. He was just like screaming and running, but he caught him in the parking garage on a ramp, tackled him. They'd called for backup, so backup was just right behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of wrestling with him when several officers rushed up and kind of grabbed and took over and pulled him to the side. And they were saying to this officer, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm okay, but he just killed my partner." And they're like, "No, your partner's fine. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" And he said, "No, I'm fine. He shot my partner. I think he's dead. You need to go check." And they said, "No, your partner's fine." He said, "I saw him get shot." And they're like, "No, he's fine." And he turned around. His partner walked up about that time and said, "Are you okay?"
What?
And they had been wrestling, and the gun had never gone off. There was never a shot. And so this officer was telling this other professor, he was saying, "This happened a while ago, and I still wake up at night. I still see it." He said, "I can still see it in my mind. I can still see my partner is getting his face blown off,
Yeah.
basically, in my mind, even though it never happened. Why is that?" And it was right after I'd finished writing a paper on this and getting it published. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is kind of the application side that I was trying to think about. Because again, I'm always wanting to tear things apart and look at it and apply
Mm-hmm.
it and figure out what's happening. And I said, I think I know what might have happened. I think that officer's worst fear was this guy could kill my partner. And that the imagining your worst fear, that signal was sent to the visual system. And because of stress, because of there's something called survival stress, what you would know about as a police officer, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fear of life, fear of harm, afraid you might die right then. That's a very extremely stressful event. Your brain, the kind of the subconscious part, the non-conscious part of your brain takes over at that point to try to help you survive. And in the subconscious brain is the amygdala, the fear center. And we know that information travels from the eye to that area and from that area to the visual cortex. So it was, I believed at the time, I still believe that that was kind of the worst fear. Like, this could happen. Be sure this doesn't happen. That signal got sent, and it was because of the stress. What the officer was seeing, that signal was less. And so I started hearing several stories like this of people seeing things or experiencing things that didn't happen when they were under a moment of extreme stress. So
Right.
I was like, that's what I want to study. And so as a college professor, it's really hard to stress college students out and, pass the ethics committee, which is good. It's a good thing. Like, you can't have somebody come in with a gun and point it to their head and
Right.
say, "I'm going to
Right.
kill you," and then say, "Oh, how did you feel during that time?" That's unethical.
But
So the way you stress students out is like, you give them a sheet of math problems and say, "Do these as fast as you can." And then you stand there and go, "Hurry, hurry, hurry," which creates stress, but not the stress I was wanting to measure.
mm-hmm.
So a colleague said, "You should do research with law enforcement because they routinely stress each other out really bad in
A lot of
practicing."
stress
And
in that job.
yeah, they
Yeah.
pull guns on each other. They have
Yeah.
airsoft that they shoot at each other and all this stuff. And they're stressed. Maybe they would let you tag along and do some research. So just to try to cut the corners and make this
Yeah.
story
You
as
do,
short as can be.
if I can, you do some research with law enforcement.
So I
And
went to, yeah, I went to London
mm-hmm.
and did some research with their drivers where
Yeah.
they were driving at high speeds, which causes the same type of stress. And
Okay.
then I started looking, I had an EEG cap on them. So they were, it was plugged into a portable EEG in the car into a laptop, and I'm measuring brain activity. Like, I have now 40-volt signals 1,000 times a second. So I have
Mm-hmm.
40,000 signals per second. I'm recording these for 30 minutes at a time, getting a lot of data from that and looking at how the brain changes what it's doing during stress. And that's what led eventually to say, there are ways that we can make people safer. There's ways to train people so that they don't get so stressed that they're misperceiving things or they're doing things they're not aware that they're doing. And there's ways to train people to be safer, to make it a habit. And as I started looking into that, that's what is when I said, hey, as I would tell people this, they would go, okay, but how? And so we just have to do these 3 or 4 things. I don't know how to do that. So that's when I left to start a tech company to build a software program that people could use to train themselves to be safer, more aware, more in control, more self-control, those types of things.
So I mean, technically, and I know it's a tech company, but you took everything. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you took everything that you had learned about the brain, all the research that you had done, and you really created a training methodology. Is that safe to say?
Yes, that's
And
exactly what it
the
is. Yeah.
vehicle is tech. Yes, you created a web based app. And in the beginning, it was targeted for law enforcement, right? When you're saying people, the beginning of this at least was to make cops safer, improve their professionalism, um, and that was done through this app.
Yeah, and then that's where we originally met,
Yeah,
and a lot of the research I did was with your uh, group out in Washington at the State Training Academy, and yeah, that's where I started. But you're right when you say it's a methodology. It's a system really of how to train. So it doesn't matter what the content is. We use law enforcement content, but then after that we left and we went to industrial safety to a manufacturing site and saw huge changes and results there.
yeah. So now we're
And we
out
went
of
to
law enforcement.
construction.
Now you're like manufacturing, construction, and you're getting the same results or even better.
Hmm.
Because you and I have talked about this, but it's important to point out. I think that intuitively people know this, but you can't measure safety in law enforcement. There's no measure of prevention, but you can actually. There are metrics in manufacturing, construction, and those other areas. I mean, I've seen the signs this many days since an accident or what
Yeah.
they have metrics, and
Yes.
so using your methodology and your tech in those areas, you were able to come up with numbers, actual,
Yes.
because I know you as a researcher. I know what you want.
I like numbers.
I know.
I
But
like
you
numbers.
actually had enough data to say to your satisfaction that these were the significant findings or these were the improvements that were
Yeah,
made.
and in law enforcement and in industrial safety combined, we've conducted over 40 experimental research studies testing the methodology. It's more than it was developing it and testing it together because we would have ideas on how to do certain things and then run experimentally see which options were most effective to
Hmm.
include in the training and then and then test them again. And after when I left Dickinson College and started doing this to start a company to do this, then we started hiring third party researchers to do our research for us.
Right.
And yeah, and then now it's gone beyond just safety. I mean, there's like you said, professionalism, and even in Washington, we've created now part of the training is for implicit bias and seeing huge changes in that where it's behavioral changes, not just changes in attitude and knowledge and things like that, but how officers treat people,
Their
behavioral
actual
change,
interactions with people, you've
interactions. Yes,
changed those for the better.
significant changes. Yeah, and
So,
then over like a period of time, like testing them over a month later after the training and still seeing
oh
those
yeah,
results.
wow. So, I mean, it started with law enforcement. You moved into manufacturing, construction, all those other areas. But would you say that this methodology would work for anybody? I mean, like a student, a teacher. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the other
Yeah.
professions.
Yeah, only if they have a human brain. So if they have a human brain, it will
Okay,
work. So
that's the factor that we're looking for. If you have a human brain,
yeah,
this will work.
because I told you, like my wife and I's brain works differently with imagination. That she can imagine better than I can. So every brain is unique in the sense of your experiences, your lived experiences. It's kind of like I think in school we were told it's like oh man, what's the Italian wedding soup or whatever? No matter how many Italian families you go to and they make the wedding soup, it's a little bit different each time, but it's all delicious. But
It's
everybody
still
puts in just a little bit different spice or a little bit different amount. That's kind of how people's brains are made. There are small differences between them, but the systems that everybody's brain has, and we're talking about the neurotypical brains. I know there are disorders, or there, somebody who's had a stroke or something, it'll be different. But I'm just saying,
Hmm.
for every person's brain operates on basic set hardwired principles that can't be changed. And that's what the training is built around, are those brain principles that works on everybody's brain.
And so you said the name of the system itself is preflex.
Yes.
That's I'm not. What is that word mean? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, if you talk about, because we're looking at the difference between your conscious awareness and the non-conscious brain. And so when the non-conscious brain is responding to something, it happens really quickly without you really knowing it's going to happen. It's like when the
Okay, yeah.
doctor hits your knee and your leg kicks and you're not controlling that. That's a reflex.
Hmm.
So a lot of things you do is just a quick response to something, like a reflex to something. So we're saying the training is to train the reflex. It's kind of before the reflex. So it's
Okay.
pre-reflex.
So
So it's
reflex is
preflex.
something happens and there's a reaction, even if it's
Yeah.
right after. You're
Mhm.
talking about this happens before. This is pre the
Yes.
whatever, the
Yes.
information, the event, all of that.
Yes.
And okay, so that makes sense. But what I was trying to get to is back to this podcast, right? Is that
Mhm.
this podcast is not designed for specifically, only for law enforcement, only for construction. This is for everybody.
Yeah.
Because and I think that we found our audience. If you have a human brain, then this will benefit you
And if you know
someday.
somebody who has a human brain, tell
There we go.
them
We
to
can even
listen, because
expand the
yeah,
web.
they
Yeah.
could get something out of it too.
So what I want so now that I've convinced you to be a part of this, I've drug you into this podcast.
And I have
Um,
had some second thoughts while we've been talking today, by the way.
oh boy, see, here we go. But again, what I have in my brain, what I want to do is I have these questions that I do think most people like me who aren't neuroscientists, aren't psychologists, don't. But things happen to us every day, and sometimes happen over and over. And we don't know why they happen. We just kind of I just kind of accept it that happened.
Mhm.
But what I want to do is just use this format or this podcast to ask you why these things happen, and have you explain them to me in a way I can understand. Again, you can save all the Latin and the big words and the acronyms. I want you to break it down for me, And so the way that I see it going is, and because I do, I am interested in what's going on in your life. I don't see you all the time. So, I do want to, this is me kind of setting you up so you know what you're in for. But
Okay.
I kind of want to start off the show just by asking you what's going on in your life at that time. And
Hmm.
and it doesn't even have to be about, the brain. It's there's things going on in your life, there's things you're interested in, there's things you're reading about. I want to know about those. That part's for
Okay.
me. But then I if I have a question, if something happens to me or something pops up and I have a question about the brain, I'm going to ask you that question. And again, this isn't a gotcha. I'm not a journalist, as you can tell from this interview, but I just I want to get your thoughts on the situation that I lay out for you.
Yeah. So a little bit of background is, one of the reasons I agreed to do this is because I don't want to put hours into preparing for a podcast, because I've got so many other things I'm
Yeah,
doing. And so you said, let's
absolutely.
just have a conversation. So if you ask me questions, as long as you're okay with this, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm just going to say, I don't really know the answer to that. Is that all right?
I've gotten used to that with you. And I mean that as a
I say that a
compliment.
lot, don't I?
Well, no, the way that I work is, again, I'm just like, just tell me what you think. And you're like, I need to find the research on that.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
one of the reasons that I want to do this with you, is because I know you won't give me an answer that you're not comfortable with. And I'm okay with that. I'm
Okay.
very okay with that. And then, outside of the events that happen in my life and the things that kind of crop up, there are things that I wonder about. There's myths out there,
Mhm.
that I'm
Mhm.
always wondering about, that I want to run by you.
So
And
many
then
of those.
the other thing is that I do want to set up some social media accounts for this podcast. And I would really love, and I don't know, I don't want to make you false promises. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I want to put out to the world, if you have questions for a cognitive neuroscientist, ask him. And let's see if he can answer them. And so there may be some episodes where at the end of the episode, I read you a user generated question about the brain. And
Okay.
again, it's okay if I ask you that question and you say, I I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out, or
Yeah.
something along those lines. I'm not going to ever try to make you, for the purpose of this podcast, ever try to make you answer something you're not comfortable answering.
Well, yeah, because I won't. So I don't
Good.
want to take
Good.
that.
Yeah.
I just from my backgrounds, if you don't know, you just say I don't know and you move on, because there's somebody out there who does know, and it's probably a really straightforward answer. And then if I try to just make something up, that gets caught very quickly. So
I don't want to do that to you
I've
at
never
all.
done that, so I won't do
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
But we should, if I could just make a suggestion that maybe we start off, I think we have to have a foundation about the brain and how it works. Like today, I was talking about the conscious and the non-conscious, and if we could, I have some other terms for those and a way to describe it. Maybe we start out with just those basics and then get in more into it, so you can kind of build
Okay.
from there. And I'm going
I
back to my teaching where you kind of scaffold things and you start with
Yeah.
a good foundation so that we all are kind of understanding the same thing and using the same terms. So
Well, why
maybe
don't
that'd be a
we
good place to
then
start.
the next week, the next episode we do, why don't we start with defining those terms, because that'll be helpful for me
Okay.
as well, to start kind of getting some definitions for some of these words, some of these concepts, laying those out. I like that idea. I
And
think
then
that's a
just
good way to
tell
go
me
about
each
it.
week what the topic will be. And then that's all. Just say, hey, this week we're gonna talk about memory, or this week we're gonna talk about attention. Just something like, I'm just being
Yeah.
really general. But then just so I kind of know where to get my frame of mind. But I'm
Okay.
not gonna do the research
I
behind that.
don't expect you to.
There are
I don't.
podcasts that do that are very good podcasts to listen to. I think like you started this out by saying this is like the bro science, just to get some common answers. This isn't about to get people ready to be brain surgeons. It's not like
Correct.
a course that they're going to
Yeah.
develop. It's
But again, it's my bro science that you're going to help fix.
yeah. Most
Because
bro
again,
science needs fixed. Yeah,
my bro science is, I heard it somewhere or half of it somewhere, and then I start to state it as fact.
yeah.
So when I do that, I have you to say, actually, that's what this is, or that's what that's called.
I will try to
Um,
do that. Yes.
I need you for that. So here's the last thing. I wanted to run something by you. So it's January right now.
Hmm.
We're a couple of weeks away from January 22nd, and so World Brain Day is July 22nd. It's 6 months
Hmm.
to the day.
Hmm.
And so I was wondering what you thought about, if I can, I have time, edit this episode, get everything in order, and then our first episode drops on January 22nd, and
Hmm.
so we can celebrate the 6 month mark until World Brain Day.
Yeah, that worked out great because World Brain Day, I think, is just to promote knowledge about the brain and brain disorders and mental health and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So that's
Yeah.
kind of what this podcast will be about, is to promote the brain and how it works and how it functions. So we could wait till July.
Oh no, I can't
You
do
don't want
that.
to
No,
shoot, I was trying to talk you
no.
into putting
Yeah,
this
I
off a
know.
little bit.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so that actually works out pretty cool then. The half year
Yeah, the
of
6 month mark
World
until
Brain
Brain
Day.
Day.
Yeah. And
Okay.
it turns out it's on a Wednesday because we'd already decided to do Wednesdays. So
Yeah, I want to, and that's an arbitrary day, but I just thought releasing, the episode that we record on
is it an
Wednesdays.
arbitrary day? Because a couple podcasts I listen to also drop it on Wednesday. And I thought
Well,
maybe that was something that you knew
my
about that I didn't.
no, I don't, but maybe my non-conscious is telling me, because I do listen to quite a few podcasts. Maybe that's where I came up
Maybe
with
that was a
Wednesday.
pattern your non-conscious picked up, because like music a lot of times is released on like a Friday, right? Or something like that. Or is it Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, because of the chart release on
Movies on Fridays. At least it
Movies
used
on
to
Friday.
be. You
Okay,
know, when we used
okay.
to go to the movie theater
Yeah,
and
yeah.
actually sit in a theater, those movies came out on Friday.
Music's Tuesday, you're right. And
Yeah.
so to get on the charts, you have a whole week so that's, people release music usually on a Tuesday because of the
Oh,
Billboard charts or whatever. So I thought maybe there's something similar with podcasts,
not
but
that I
maybe
know
not.
of. I'm not a podcaster, by the way. Don't let the headphones and the microphone fool you. This is new to me.
We're both amateurs, is that what you're
Yeah, I
saying?
am. I don't know what's less than an amateur, but
And we probably don't have to worry about podcast charts or anything like that.
I'm not worried about that. The last thing I'll tell you about this podcast, I don't know that anyone's going to listen to it, but
Yeah,
I had a
that's
great
better
time.
for me.
I had a great time today. This is fun. If this is how it's going to go, then it's worth it for me.
I haven't even told Casey I'm doing this because I don't want her to listen. So
Stop it.
no,
Well,
I'm
I'm going to
I'm
send her
lying
a
about
message
that.
right now
I'm
and tell
lying
her
about that.
January 22nd. Be on the
Okay.
listen for it. So,
Okay,
well,
sounds good.
hey, John, thank you for your time, all that information. I am really looking forward to doing more of these.
That was fairly painless.
Good. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Sean. Talk
Take
later.
care.